Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, as long as you're over 13, thank you so much for joining us today on The Gas Up. As always, my name is John Case. With me is my co-host, Joe Remele. Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Episode 3, we made it. We're recording. This is, as always, exciting, and I'm excited to get into it today.
Absolutely, right? I didn't know if it was going to happen or not. We had a couple of technical difficulties, some scheduling conflicts. Life got in the way, so it's always interesting when we can finally get a time, sit down, and actually chop it up like we'd like to do.
Yeah, and if we do this right, our viewers will be none the wiser, right? Because we'll still have a show, and they can still go on and check us out whenever at their convenience. So it's
correct, exactly.
It's good to be in that situation.
Whenever you're watching it, whenever that is, we thank you for joining us today. That's awesome. So
yeah, shout out to my dad, our latest subscriber on our YouTube page. My dad was texting me reactions to segments from a month ago that we recorded. So I was like, oh, I don't know if I quite remember the context of that text, but appreciate the love. Thanks, Dad.
And speaking of which, shout out to all the other subscribers. We actually got into double digits, which is actually very cool. Kind of not knowing where this thing was going and how it was going to develop. Definitely all, I think it was like, 12, 13, 14 of you out there. Thank you so much for taking the time to subscribe. And we actually got, as a matter of fact, we got our first dislike.
Oh, man.
I think that makes us official. I think
it's a good feeling to get that out of the way, right? Like, agree to disagree.
The first thumbs
and
down.
By the way, if you don't leave a comment, your dislike is like, it's like going to dinner and just saying like, oh, this sucks at the end without like any sort of constructive criticism or review. So, drop us a comment. Tell us why you disliked it. Or maybe you're just being a tool and you just wanted to dislike us. Either way, I feel like we made it, so it's a good feeling.
I agree. Getting it out of the way early.
Controversial for one reason or another. I don't even remember what show or what segment that was, but appreciate the hate. The hate means you made it.
And we got it out of the way. So hopefully more thumbs up and thumbs down to come. It is what it is. It comes with the territory. It's part of the game.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Hey, so tell me a little bit about your week. It took us a while to get here. It's not our normal recording time. So walk me through how we got here.
It was a busy week. I think they're getting progressively busier, which is getting, obviously, the balancing act becomes a little bit more difficult. But it was a good week. I got a lot of great opportunities. I called you earlier in the week, and I said, man, like it feels like I got a full-time job here. And you just started cracking up because obviously as a business owner and a consultant, you never really put yourself in a position where you're employed, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But it's just one of the deals I have going on right now. It's just they're at the precipice of a great opportunity, and I'm very much needed in that realm to kickstart a sales strategy. So it basically is equating to a full-time job right now, and I'm super blessed to have it, considering everything that's going on. But I basically called you and said, hey man, at some point in this week I got a full-time job. I don't know how that happened. So but it's good, man. How about you? How was your week?
That call was pretty amazing because as I recall, it went something like, hey Case, I think I might have a job now.
I think I'm booked, bro.
I think I'm booked for the next couple of
Completely
months.
Booked. Yeah.
So that was awesome. It's one of those things where you can never pass up a great opportunity, right?
Absolutely not. Great company, great opportunity. Love to help them. They were already a client, so it's a no-brainer. We already have a relationship. They want me to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm happy to do that for them. So
see, that's awesome. And hopefully, you continue to get great opportunities like that, because kind of like we talked about last week, right? What you have a chance to kind of sift through and pick out the things that you like. And when you have a great partner that you feel matches you and what you're trying to accomplish within your own organization, well, then might as well try to knock it out the park. So definitely have to keep us kind of in the loop as things develop, as it becomes a little harder and harder to schedule this thing as we're working around your full-time job.
They're like, why are they 2, 3, 4 weeks out on the next episode?
Yeah, what happened there? It's like,
that's the blessing of being a consultant, is that you do a great job for a client, and the options are endless. So like literally one client could be engagement upon engagement. Everything could grow.
Mm-hmm.
Things could develop into, quote unquote, not a full-time job. That was kind of a joke, but
the
all of your time is gone.
Yeah, exactly.
So it feels like a full-time job.
Yep.
So that's the exciting part, is like all you need is 1 or 2 great clients in this business. You don't, in your shoes, like I would love to hear your thought process on referrals and how do you maintain your book of business, because not everyone's going to buy or sell a house every month.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously you're going to get some one-off type clients, and then it becomes a game of, can they refer into a friend, a family member, or somebody that, you know, is in their network, but you're not going to get like that residual, you know, you're going to keep producing opportunities for me for a long period of time. So how do you balance that out?
You know, it's funny. It's kind of because the thing about with the real estate is not everybody buys at the same time. As a matter of fact, like right now, working with a variety of buyers, and they're all at different stages. One person has the money on hand, but they don't have the credit. So we're actively working to get the credit in a place where we can actually get the loan, right? Somebody else is on the flip side. They have the credit, but they don't have the down payment. The down payment's coming down the line. They're expecting a bonus to come in from work. And so we're building everything up to that point. And then I have another one that has neither. So we're working on both ends.
Lots of work.
But the reality is, so it's kind of, it's staggered. And what's interesting with the referral business is that oftentimes in that time frame, there's opportunities there as you're working with them, as you're showing them the value of what it is that you're bringing to the table. They're happy to share that with their friends and family, colleagues, and you never know where you can get even more work from that. And the good thing about it is that you can kind of stagger it a little bit, because normally, obviously there are instances where it does happen, but normally everybody's on a little bit of a different schedule. So you can kind of space them out. While I'm working with somebody looking at homes, somebody else is working on the credit, somebody else is working on getting the down payment. So we're actually in different stages within the same process. And so my time can be allocated differently with each one, whether it's counseling on one side, physically being at properties on the other side, or writing offers. They're all kind of a little bit different, and it allows us to space things out quite nicely. So
give us an update on the plant. Everyone's dying to know how the plant's doing. Has it grown? Is it tending towards one side or the other?
So I don't know if you can tell, but that sucker is right now living its best life. If you actually take the time, and I'm sure hopefully somebody down the line does, to actually compare
time lapse the plant.
That sucker's gotten bigger.
Please
it really
do
has.
that for me. I'm not going to be doing that. So if you're a subscriber and you want to make a couple extra bucks, hit me up.
Time lapse the plant back there. Yeah. From no plant to big plant. So the plant is.
Are you feeding it? What's your plant? You know, how do you harvest this thing from here? Do you give it plant food, or do you just kind of give it? You talk to it. They say you're supposed to talk to your plants, so I don't know if you're doing.
So
that.
Full disclosure, first plant I've ever actually had. Like, in trying to keep it alive has been a bit of a challenge because I forget to water it. I forget to put it out in the sunlight. So it's actually been a concerted effort to try to keep that guy alive, or gal. I don't even know
this is like a weekly checkpoint now. If 100%. I see that it's like tending down, I'm gonna be like, bro, you gotta get some water on that thing. You gotta Viewers, if we get to week 4 here and you notice the plant is slouching, just shoot us some comments and we'll fix that for you.
Please drop us a comment in the video.
By Case's own admission, he's not a green thumb. So.
But I'm working on it. So to answer your question,
I mean, right now, I've been
plenty of water. I actually walk it around the house, so I take it from inside to outside to get.
But do you talk to it? That's.
I do talk to it. I do talk to it. I try to get it hyped up.
Voice? Is it like a cute pet?
No. It's more like, okay, we're going to be on camera today, so I need you to look your best. I need you to go.
It's like you're coaching.
It's like my co-host. I mean, besides you.
Don't let me down today, plant.
Exactly. I don't want you drawing all the attention, but you got to look good. You got to put your best face forward, kind of situation. So it works. We'll keep an eye on the plant overall and see how it develops. But
a little Seinfeld feel to it, right? It's a little.
You can definitely
show
see
about nothing right now.
It's looking good. It's looking good. Well, with bouncing off of that, the full-time job, how did you find trying to balance that in this? Because obviously we're not recording on Sunday. We normally record on Sunday, usually like around midday. It's a little bit later in the week and it's later in the evening. How did you find trying to get that? And I was pushing you. I'm like, yo, dude, we got to record. We got to get this thing on tape. How did you find kind of balancing everything out, working out?
I think that's the cool part about our partnership is like we nudge each other back on the line frequently. So we've produced 2 weeks of show. This will be our 3rd show. So we haven't lived the full 3rd cycle yet, but at each step of the way, we've kind of nudged each other back, whether it's a time issue or a timing issue, whether it's a, hey, we got to get this thing done, whether it's opening the YouTube channel or editing clips or cutting promos. So we're really good at like, okay, I understand that like we're both trying to balance a lot. And at the same time, like we got to keep the ball moving. We got to get content up on the site. We got to keep this thing going. So, I mean, that's where my head's been at. Like, and part of the challenge sometimes is like when you're rendering clips, like, I don't know, for those of you who edit at home, anything or try to produce anything from editing standpoint, to render a 1 hour show oftentimes, depending on your device, video card, all that takes 3-4 times longer than the thing you're trying to produce. So like our full show, to render it took me like 4 hours one morning to do, which, I mean, and so that's, that's taking one entire computer,
Yeah, not
for
doing
half
anything.
the day.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not necessarily that I can't do anything else with it. It's just, you got to be careful with what you do and what you move. And so that's one of the challenges, is like finding an appropriate time to render, longer clips. And then obviously to edit. I mean, we're not doing a ton of editing, thank God. Remember initially when you came to
Well, I wanted to
this,
have like a whole production, like,
well, originally I was like, nope, we're
doing.
doing audio only, and this is like, we're just, I could edit the hell out of some audio and
Yeah.
make it sound really clean. And you were like, no, but video, it's so much better of a
It's
medium
the
for
future,
us.
man. The video's the future.
It was the future in the 80s. Now it's just table stakes.
Right.
But yeah, so I felt like I was pretty adamantly against video for the editing and post production reasons. But but that being said, we're not we're not producing. The post production is not terribly difficult on this show. It's just trying to come up with something that's on point and succinct and not terribly boring for anybody. Like we kind of cut it down to the good parts of the show.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's a balance, but I think what you do well is you just throw it on my calendar. Like here it is.
Yeah.
It's on your calendar. Don't put anything there. You got 24 hours to figure this out, or 48 hours or whatever. And that's kind of what I need to reset myself and get myself back on task for the show.
Well, it's interesting because since this is kind of our own production, we're kind of moving at our own pace. There's no, I've been in other situations, like for example, when we did it's funny today, setting up everything for the shoot, it really reminded me a lot of my KSWT days working at the TV station of having to set up the cameras, having the pre-production meeting, all of that stuff that, you kind of just got used to doing after a while being in that environment. And then kind of what you and I are doing now, kind of mimicking that. It was interesting of like setting up the camera, trying to set up the shot, trying to make sure that we kind of look similar in, size and spacing, all that stuff. Getting the mic set up, getting the proper lighting, which I'm still working on. I'm shiny as hell, but still trying to,
it keeps the plant going though. So it's working for the plant.
So, but all that stuff, really, it does take a little bit of time. Even, I mean, I don't know how long it takes you, but for me, the setup to get to this point is about like a good 30 minutes, 35 minutes. Got to test a bunch of things, like to test the sound. I usually like to record a little bit before we even get on together and just get a sense of kind of like the voices sounding, kind of how everything's going. So, it's interesting putting all this stuff together. And then there's the component of the, of all the stuff kind of outside of it, as far as like promo and marketing. So at this point, I've registered the Twitter account. So we have a Twitter account now. We have an Instagram account, created a Facebook page, working on the actual web page at this point as well. So trying to bring everything together, trying to create a community. So actively talking to other folks online and things like that. And all that takes time, right? On top of running our normal businesses, there's this other thing that now that needs attention and needs to be put together, quite frankly, from scratch.
By the way, we're totally self-taught at this. I mean, we didn't
there's
get
no
a manual.
playbook, right? There's no playbook.
We definitely aren't experienced in producing podcasts or shows or running our own YouTube channels. I mean, you have a little bit more marketing experience around your business than I do, because I've only been in business for, the better part of this year, couple months. So, how much of this stuff did you know beforehand, and how much is just completely you had to teach yourself in the last 3-4 weeks?
So the social stuff, I kind of had an idea. Like we've been on social for the real estate company now for some time, but even then, trying to really figure out what resonates with people and growing that audience takes some time. I mean, it's still not where I would like it to be. I would like it to have a much broader, greater audience, but I knew offhand, especially in today's reality, we have to have some social footprint. There's no way we can try to grow this without that at all. And it's also a great, those are great vehicles to deploy the show, right? To allow people to see the clips, to allow people know that we exist, to let them have that window into our world over here. So the social was off the bat real quick, the thing that I knew we had to get going.
For our viewers and listeners, tell the story about creating champions. I think you teed that up for me really well when I was starting my social channels for my business. how you basically said, you know, grab some people that you're close with and make them your champion, meaning reach
Mhm.
out and say, you know, it would mean the world to me. So, you know, kind of walk people through
Yeah.
the advice that you gave me, because I definitely use it, and it's
Mhm.
something that I use in my business every day. And I have like a group chat or a couple people that I always ask, you know, hey, can you like or share this? So
Mhm.
share the advice that you gave me with everybody else, 'cause I think it's really powerful advice.
Absolutely. So, and this is, by the way, not an original idea. This is something that I took from another coach
It
as
was new
well.
to me, so I
Right.
mean, I
Exactly.
appreciated it.
So,
Yeah.
but the idea is there will always be people in your life, generally speaking, who want to see you succeed, who root for you to succeed, and who know the caliber of the person that you are and the quality of the work that you do. And so, whether it's people that you've worked with previously, or sometimes it might be family members, friends, folks in your circle who know who you are and are willing to vouch for you. You call them your champions. Those are the people who are willing to go at bat for you and who are
Hmm.
willing to tell people, hey, check this out. This is my buddy Joe, my buddy John. They're putting this thing together. It's pretty interesting. You should check it out yourself. So they're willing
Hmm.
to go, because it's funny. Even though nowadays all you need is like a share or like a retweet or a like or whatever, that social currency is hard to come by. You'll find sometimes you put a post up and you think it's fantastic, right? You're like, oh, look at that. I spent
And
all
it
time
just
here.
whiffs, right?
Oh, dude, it just glossed over. Nobody even
Yeah.
looks at it, right?
Yeah.
And so
Like,
having
what
those,
was it? Me? What did I do? Is
yeah,
this not
exactly. Or did
interesting?
the message, yeah, exactly. I
Start
like
taking
to,
it all personal.
yeah. Well, I mean, especially for example, like a real estate nerd like myself, right? Oh my God, this article's talking about this and that, and da da da.
Yeah,
And you put
this
it
is
up there, and it's like
badass.
crickets. Nobody pays
Yeah.
attention, right? And I'm like,
No
but
one's
this
got
was
time
great
for that.
information, right?
Yeah.
So your champions, the people that are willing to go to bat for you, that's where they can really help you out, especially at the beginning. At the beginning, a lot of people don't know who you are. A lot of people may not ever heard of you, and so having those folks out there who are willing to give you pub, if you will, like, hey, check this guy out. Or I have a couple of folks, for example, that I know when I need to get something out, especially my biggest one is when I have a listing. When I'm actually
Mhm.
selling a home, I need
Right.
to get eyeballs
You
on
need
it.
the
So
broadest network on that. Yeah.
100%, like the more people who can see it, the better, because that gives my client a better chance to sell the home.
Yep.
So what I try to do is when I have a post coming out, I'll hit up my folks, my champions, and I'm like, hey man, hey gal, can you help me out? I have this thing coming out. I'm going to make it live at like 8 p.m. Would you mind just sharing it with your network? Because when you hit share or when you hit like, that populates on your side, letting people know John liked Joe's post or
Right.
Joe
Everybody
shared
sees
it.
that.
Mhm.
That's a huge network
It's
hit.
it's social currency. I like to call it social currency. It really is
That's a
social
cool way to
currency.
say it. So
And
what's been your experience? Because when you told me that, I was like, yeah, like duh, right? That was an epiphany that was waiting to be had for me, because there's some people that were already in that category for me. Like I had champions that I just didn't know were champions that always like my stuff, always share my stuff, always comment on my blogs. Like they're actively engaged. I don't have to ask them to do anything. They're just
mhm,
like, oh, Remy's doing something, I'm going to chase it with a like or a share or whatever. And you
yeah,
know, obviously thank you to those people. But then there's other people like when you gave me that advice, it's like, well, let me reach for, you know, 5 or 10 more of those type people that I know feel the same way. They're just maybe not as active on social media, or maybe they have a bigger network than a network that I would like to tap into for whatever reason. They're either in
mhm,
the niche that I'm trying to talk to, or they just have a big network in general.
mhm.
And you kind of recruit some of those people. So for you, was it like half and half like me, or was it like you kind of had to go find more of those people for your field to share your stuff?
It was kind of a mix of both. At the beginning,
Yeah.
obviously, family and friends are the ones that carry the heavy load. But
Yeah.
inevitably, as you begin to venture into your specific space, there's other folks in there that you'll resonate with. So there's people, for example, in the real estate side, it's you can imagine it can be a little challenging to get another realtor for a competing company to retweet you or to share your listing, right? Your
Right.
information. They're going to
Especially
be
if their
like,
network's bigger than yours,
right? They're like, yeah, no.
therefore their social currency has more weight than
Well,
yours.
or at least they perceive it to be that way.
Right.
So that's where you can kind of get go ancillary, right? So, for example, I have other folks who work in the solar industry. I think we've chatted a little bit
Yeah.
about that off camera.
Yep.
I have folks who, for example, are stagers, who are landscapers, who pool inspectors, all the folks who are around the business,
Sure.
who then can also benefit from me. So I like to be other people's champions. If you work with me and you do a fantastic job, I have no problem letting people know, like, hey, this person knocked it out the park.
The
Like,
power of referrals
uh,
continues to be a topic on the show.
totally, totally. But it
It's an
even goes
amazing thing.
beyond the referral, because, for example, I'm not necessarily telling you like, hey, This is John Smith at 123-456-789. Give him a call. This is
Right.
more of like, to the world, I'm saying, hey, this is somebody that you should pay attention to. This is somebody that does good work. This is an article that's worth reading, whatever that situation might be.
Yeah.
That champion, and in doing that, you kind of build this reciprocal relationship of allowing people to see information. Because at the end of the day, whether they call or not, or whether they click on somebody else clicks on it or not, the simple step of you sharing it, liking it, commenting, whatever, it carries a lot of weight. And that I'm always very grateful for that. It's like, I understand that you don't have to do it. I appreciate the fact that you took the time to stop while you were scrolling through your feed. Think about how fast people go through their feed, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, whether
The
it's
younger
LinkedIn,
you are, the faster you fly.
yeah, just pa, 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 pa. Oftentimes it's on the phone, right?
Right.
So the fact that you took the time to stop, make a comment on my post, or share my post, or even just hit the like button, that really means a lot to me, because it shows that for a quick second you were willing to think of me and
Yeah.
and my cause and what I'm trying to do. And that's really powerful. That's really, an awesome thing that you can do. So I always encourage people, like, if there is somebody out there that you do like, that you do appreciate, share their stuff. Hit the share button, hit the like, make a comment, even if it's something like, dude, I love you. If it's a bakery, I love the fresh baked bread, man. It's amazing. That little nugget might be what pushes somebody to be on a Friday night. I've been wanting to check out this bakery for a while, and I haven't had, but I saw that Case made a comment. Yeah, let's go check it out, right?
Don't be stingy with the love, man. We need love right now, especially small business. Like, give those people some love, because they're. And by the way, shout out to, I had an epiphany today. We went out to breakfast to a place we haven't been in a long time, but they're open now. We wanted to show our love for them. And you could tell that a lot of these businesses, especially in the food industry or bars even, they're open, but you can tell they're not necessarily profitable right now. Like, they're
100%.
kind of open out of the kindness of their heart, is what I told my wife. Like, these guys aren't making any money, and they're having a tough time getting staff because people are still riding fat on unemployment. And so, so thank you to those businesses that have reopened to basically no financial gain, because you could have stayed closed and, limited our options as consumers. And so, I appreciate that they're open and they're doing the right thing, and they're hoping that things build from here. And so that's really cool. And I just kind of was super appreciative after we had breakfast today that, these guys are still hurting. They're still losing money. Treat them accordingly. Treat them like they're kind of out here helping us instead of,
and they are, right? They're providing
it's
a fantastic
not a greed
service.
business right now, for sure. There's very little profit, if any. And I'm sure you could ask a lot of business owners right now that are open, and they'll tell you the same thing. Like, we're not open because we're killing it. We're open because we're allowed to, and we want to hit that crescendo back to where we were, or maybe even better, right?
But it's tough, right? Like, the places that I've been to and the places that I've seen, even the restrictions alone, I don't think they'll be able to go back to full capacity anytime soon. So they're definitely hurting in that respect, as far as, the necessary, because I mean, in any business, right, you usually have a game plan of, we're going to need this many bodies, for every X amount of hours that we're open.
Yeah, restaurant, it's all about flipping tables, right? So when you write your business plan as a restaurant or a bar, you're like, okay, we got 30 tables in here. They're 2 tops and 4 tops. We got to flip every table 7 times an hour.
Right.
That's our break-even point. If we do it 9 times an hour, that's all. Those two extra ones are all profit.
We're making money.
So when you're business planning for a kind of a bar, restaurant, one of those high failure rate businesses in America, that's how you do it. And then you have to generate cash flow eventually that covers that, whatever that margin is. And if you're wrong, it's even worse than how you factored it. But I've seen those business plans, and they're very much just, we have 30 tables and we got to turn them 5 times an hour to break even.
Yeah.
And if we can do better than 5 times an hour, then we win. And if we can't, we lose. It's that simple. But that's based on the fact that you have 30 tables in the restaurant or the bar. Now, right now, the governor could say, well, you can only have 12 of those active, and the other, whatever's left, 18, got to be X'd out. And then you're like, well, how the hell do I make any money?
Yeah, how does that even work, right?
So, but you got to open eventually. You got to get in the game to play the game. So it's, like I said, it's very eye-opening being out right now, because it's like, ooh, man, this is a tough market to try to have a business in, especially if you just open the business. Like, there's some businesses that just happened to be building themselves up, and now they
Yeah.
open, and it's like, this isn't what we
How
forecasted
how
at
is
all.
it over there? Does it feel more normal-ish? Like, are people more out and about? I definitely see more traffic here in San Diego for sure. There's definitely a lot more people out.
This is a very strange time, because I think the case counts say we're backing up real fast. We're
Yeah,
going the wrong
exactly.
way in a hurry. So everyone's like, but we can do all these things. So now you really figure out how bad you want it. Like, okay, every single day, 1,000 more cases in California. Every single day, it goes
Yeah,
up 1,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. We're going to see a 6,000 today. By the time this airs, we might be in the
more.
8, ten
Yeah,
thousand, right? So then it's like, you either really got to want it, or you really got to feel safe in the environment you're going into. I think it's a combination of both. You got to feel safe and you got to want it. But yeah, I mean, this is not a great climate for business. So especially for those type of businesses, obviously there's other types of business that is doing quite well and we're unaffected or positively affected. But it really makes you thankful that people are taking risks financially just to create some sort of normal that we all kind of crave. But it's a very tense time right now for that.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's why bringing it back around, give those likes, those shares, those comments. You never know
Don't be
how
stingy.
positively, yeah, those things could positively affect one of those businesses, and boom, you're doing your good deed for the day. So
Yeah.
definitely keep track on that. And then another thing, so the evolution of this thing at this point, hopefully down the line, we'll have I'll make sure we can upload all of our handles so that if people want to find us on other media, as far as on our Instagram or our Twitter, Facebook page, whatever, we'll make it super easy for folks to be able to find us
Yeah,
inevitably at
that
some
way,
point.
if you want to thumbs down us at that point, then you could DM us and
Okay.
say, "Hey, you guys are assholes, and here's why," and then we could actually respond.
And if you could do it on Twitter, and then maybe on Facebook, and then maybe also on Instagram, that way we can have a nice, robust client or community interaction. That would be fantastic.
Yeah,
We would
that'd be
love that.
great.
So uh, I got another question for you with regards to not just the timing and the production of everything, but how do you feel like the show's coming along? How do you feel about today? I'll be honest, I was a little nervous, not in the sense of like butterflies or anything of that. More so like at this point, like you said, we're carrying a show, right? So we
Yeah.
produce content, think about what you're saying. The first show was kind of like a one-off, like let's see if we can do it. Show number 2 was kind of like, okay, let's put it together. But this one took a little bit of getting up to this point. How are you feeling about that?
I think this is a make or break show, and I thought about that as we were kind of preparing today. Like, the first one, we did production meeting on top of production meeting on top of, we even made like a little mini script for it. We were so prepared. And
Yeah.
what we found is, like, it took a steady build up to get to the better part of the show. Like, it just took us kicking the ball around for a couple segments to get really comfortable with each other. And so in the second show, we kind of scaled it back. We didn't do so much planning, and we tried to make things play out a little more organically during the show. And I think this one even more stripped back. Like, we basically just said 4 topics on the board. We're gonna run. We're gonna run. However, we're gonna start recording when we start talking, and maybe there'll be some good stuff before the actual quote unquote show. Which I think ultimately is going to be the format, right? It's going to be like, hey, here's some things to keep us on time and keep us informed, and things we're going to study before we talk about them, so we don't have, the fact checking world doesn't come and crush us in our ignorance. But I think the better version of this show will ultimately be just you and I. I think some of our phone calls would be great shows. It's like a bummer. Like, whenever we have a great phone call, like yesterday, when we were just kind of talking through, okay, we're a little bit late on the recording. Here are the topics. We're kind of honing in on our topics. I was like, man, that was a great phone call.
Yeah, it
That
was.
would have been a great show if we
Yeah.
just happened to record that. So what I'm learning more and more is that we have to trust the fact that we have great conversations in general. And as long as we stay on topic, and we're not just like, oh, I don't know what to talk about. Like, let's talk about ping pong tournaments or whatever. Like, as long as we have a subject matter, we'll do great. We just got to trust ourselves. We got to keep putting out content. We do have to find that home, that consistent drop time, that you can count on us on X day at X time to have content out to you. We got to get in your iPods and your Apple Music and your Spotify's in your kind of airwaves that way, because I feel like I would listen to the show as a listener more on audio channels than I would on video channels. That's just me personally. So, like, for the me type of listener that listens to podcasts but doesn't necessarily go on YouTube to watch stuff, I'm like, we're kind of missing a crucial part of the demographic. And actually, I listen to podcasts frequently when I'm in the car, to educate myself on business and on how to be a better consultant, how to sell, whatever it is that I'm selling. And oftentimes it's also sports and pop culture. So like literally everything that our show are the things that I listen to on audio format, even the radio, right? I listen to AM 570 and ESPN 710
Yeah.
when I'm in the car as well, just to get my daily dose of like what's going on in the sports world.
Right.
So yeah, I think that, we owe it to our viewers and our early subscribers to get into those mediums so that we can expand and make better content. But I feel really good about the direction the show's going in. I know we released on Saturday night at 8 p.m. It was the night before Father's Day. That was probably a mistake to drop our whole show on Saturday night. Even though
got
right
a couple
now,
views. I mean, we still got a couple views.
Yeah,
it wasn't terrible, but definitely not as much traction as before. Previously,
a lot of this is we don't get disheartened on how many clicks, how many views. Like we're not obsessed with that, which is good, because if we did, we'd probably have jumped off the highest building by now. But because you're creating a canvas, in my opinion, we're creating a canvas for people to come in and check us out and watch 2 or 3 segments if they don't have time, or watch a whole show if it's a if the topic of the show or some segment is important to them. And we're going to continue to paint that canvas for everybody until, there's some sort of outcome, whether it's more traction, more viewers, more subscribers, whether it's, this really isn't working from a video standpoint. Let's try it on an audio only standpoint. Let's take smaller bites out of it and release 5-minute segments or even 1-minute segments. But we want to help people also. Like, I think a big part of the show that makes me feel good is somebody is listening to this and they're a step behind us somewhere, whether it's creating a show, whether it's making their own podcast, whether it's becoming a consultant, or basically taking a risk that they're not going to go back into the workforce as a W-2 employee, and they're going to bet on themselves and they're going to start their business, or they're going to become a realtor, or they're going to become a lawyer, or something that we hit on in this show that can motivate somebody to do it, or give them a roadmap. Like you said, your champions information that you gave me was a borrowed thing that you didn't create. That didn't come from Case's roadmap, or you didn't write that in a book somewhere, but you gave it to me, and I didn't necessarily understand it in the way that you gave it to me. But once you gave it to me in that neatly packaged system, I was able to recruit it and use it and help myself grow, help my business grow. It'll help the show grow. So that's my goal, really, is let's create the canvas and let's help people have the courage or go on to do better things in their business or show.
Because at this point, when I watch other media, I'm actually watching it not just as a consumer, but as a creator as well.
You're scouting now.
I really am. It's interesting how that perspective changes, because all of a sudden I'm watching XYZ podcast and I'm looking at what they're doing, how they're sitting, what they're saying, how the show flows. And there's more produced shows, and then there are more laid back shows. And to your point earlier, kind of how the conversation ebb and flows, where they take the conversation, how the conversation sometimes comes to like an abrupt halt and they have to kind of get it going again. So it's really
does it make you worried that some of these guys are getting in trouble for bits that they did like 5, 10, 15 years ago? Like, does that worry you? Because like we had 2 instances this week. One of them was Joe Rogan, obviously the talk of the podcast world.
Right.
And the other one was Jimmy Kimmel, right?
Kimmel, yeah. And not just Kimmel, but other Man Show, but other comedian. This kind of hit comedians heavy as far as, I feel like comedians as a whole try to push that envelope, to borrow Charlie Murphy's line. They're habitual line steppers, right? they're constantly on that.
Comedy is a suspension of belief, right? Like when you walk into a comedy show, it's like when you listen to Eminem, like you don't really think that he's going to kill his wife, put her in the trunk, and drive her off a cliff.
You would hope, right?
But you suspend belief and you listen to the album and you kind of try to get in his mentality, in his head, knowing that like the man, Marshall Mathers, is not going to do that.
Right.
It's the same thing with comedy. Like these comedians are very good at delivering something that feels like they would really feel that way, but they're not really saying that they're going to do these things. And so it puts the comedy world in this great debate right now of like, look, everyone's so sensitive. People are getting hung up for things they did 9 years ago. Like in Joe Rogan's case, he didn't even say anything.
Yeah,
he just was complicit
he was just there.
He was laughing at a situation that was obviously inappropriate, but on a show that's very inappropriate all the time. Like it's not like all of a sudden he was on KFI and then things got inappropriate and he condoned it, right? This man is a comedian. He's been on shows. He has his own show. he does inappropriate shit for a living. Like, why are we holding him to a standard 9 years later? So does that like worry you as somebody who's releasing media that's been going to have a digital footprint, if you will, for a long period of time?
So I think yes and no. Yes, in the sense that uh, the internet has shown that this stuff lives forever. So regardless of what you put out there, it's just out there. And now people have, I mean, you and I had a conversation now about, somebody chopping this up and making us look terrible, right? Like you totally cut it up in a way where all of a sudden I didn't say
Yeah.
that, or, so yes, there's a little bit of apprehension there. But I also think that as long as you're genuine and true, I mean, it is what it is, right? You can only be yourself. And
Yeah.
so I think that's really what you try to lean heavy in, or you lean into, is just yourself. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what I think. I also think we're in this weird time where the lens through which we all culturally looked at things is shifting. You see
And
this with like
it's super magnified
right,
and
right,
shifting. Yeah.
and not just that, you see it with like not just what's happening with in the comedy world, that you see it also with like all the protests that were continue. I mean, they continue. They haven't stopped. Maybe not with the
Yeah.
same veracity as earlier in the month, but definitely they're still around. They're still actively
Sure.
engaged in that activity. They've added now taking down statues to what they're doing, as well, as far as bringing attention to these things. So I think that, and the idea behind, for example, pulling down the statues is, are we celebrating somebody that are a heritage or an idea that we no longer agree with, right? Maybe
Yeah.
maybe we no longer see things that way, and so that monument, that statue that once was held in high esteem or put up there for whatever reason. Obviously, a statue is usually kind of to commemorate
A
something. That's my
memorial of
understanding. Yeah,
sorts. Yeah.
exactly, right. And so, and I think that culturally, like 2020 has been an interesting year in that everything is shifting, and it's shifting quickly and in real time, right? It's happening as we're like
Yeah. Right
living
now.
it. It's not like, yeah, exactly. It's not like down the road there's some
It's not like,
benchmark.
hey, there's a plan to like knock down a statue. It's like, no, we're going
Yeah,
down
yeah,
there. We're taking it down this
right,
second.
right. Or in
But
the
that's a good
comedy,
point, though.
you
So,
know,
so when a statue is toppled, right, in an
yeah.
American city, are we saying culturally that this was a bad person, that we don't like this person? Or are we saying this statue is somewhat complicit with a movement that we no longer accept? So like if George Washington was a slave owner, and we say George Washington, because he was a slave owner, we're taking down that statue.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with the Confederate flag or whatever. Are we saying as a society that George Washington is a bad dude now? Or are we saying we just don't want reminders of slavery in our everyday? Like, it's not something I want to walk by on my way to the donut shop.
That's an interesting question, man. I think it. So I'll give you my take, kind of like my perspective, because I
Yeah,
really don't know what the
just your
collective
take.
is
Not
thinking.
obviously you can't
Right.
speak for like
For the
every
collective,
American
right? But
who's
for
ripping
me, it
down
would be,
statues.
for example, maybe that statue is better served in a museum, for example, right? Maybe that statue is used as a teaching tool, because a lot of
Yeah.
times people harp on the idea, well, that's our history, and to a certain extent, they're 100% right. That is something that happened. That is using George Washington, for example, that is an individual that played a significant role in the development of this country.
Yeah.
So, but maybe to your point, the ideals or the lifestyle or what was accepted in his time no longer coincides with what we culturally agree to is the norm now, or it was not the norm actually, because it's changing. So, but what was culturally accepted, I'll leave it at that. What was culturally accepted at one point
Right.
maybe is no longer the case today. And so potentially maybe we shift that monument, that statue, whatever, from one place to another, as far as like this goes now into like a museum or some kind of heritage memorial or something where that history lives on, but there's a caveat of this, there was more to this person than just maybe the folklore or the stories that you're told. This was a complicated individual living in a complicated time, and so because of that, we remember them, we talk about them, we don't ignore it, right? We don't pretend like George Washington didn't exist, but there's
Correct.
also context that's provided that maybe just having a fountain in the middle of a park with a guy on top of a horse doesn't necessarily convey, right? Maybe there's additional information provided.
But the difference being that George Washington isn't, well, I guess, would people in historically now, when we look back, will we say George Washington was a good guy who just happened to be a slave owner, and we don't like the fact that he owned slaves, so we're going to relegate his statues to a museum instead of a public place. Because like if you go into Germany, like I saw somebody post this and I thought it was kind of eye-opening for me. If you go into Germany, there's not like Nazi flags up because it was their history. There's no
Yeah.
Nazi leaders that are in public statue
Revered, right?
form.
That are like,
They're
yeah.
not revered,
Mm-mm.
but then again, everyone in Germany kind of agrees like that was stupid. Like that's not us. We
That was a
don't, as a
bad look
country,
all the way
that was a
around.
bad look for all of us.
Yeah.
And so we're not gonna fly flags and
Yeah.
hang statues. So I guess it's just so nuanced in America, because in Germany it's clear cut. It's like, we're not Nazis.
No,
We don't
not
want to be
allowed. Not
associated with
allowed at
that.
all. Right.
It's totally a changing of the guard. But in America, it's like, this dude was big in founding the country, and a lot of these guys were, and their fathers were slave owners, and their neighbors were slave owners, and they just were doing whatever it took to run their plantation. And obviously we know now that that's not our look. That's not the look that we were going for. But it's very difficult to say that's a bad dude, because I mean, I guess, do you agree with that? Is that just a bad dude because he decided to own slaves?
I think it's more complicated than that. I don't like I've said before, I think there's levels, right? It's not on off, yes, no, black, white kind of thing. I think there's levels, like that he played a key role in the foundation of this country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you believe in this country, well, then there's some good in that, right? But also there were some other things, for example, like slave ownership, where I find it difficult to believe that on some level they didn't know what they were doing was, I think it was wrong.
Like, how does it not hit that moral trigger of
correct.
like,
Like,
this
how do you
just
own a
seems
human
wrong?
being? Correct. Like, how do you own a
Yeah,
human being and are okay with it? Because of the time that I
because
live in,
everyone else
and
was doing it.
I
Is that good
guess
enough?
I don't know. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's hard for me to put myself in that mind state and
Yeah,
try to encompass that man's shoes and what he was living and going through and everything.
yeah,
But in 2020 today, with everything going on and the world that I've grown up in, it just seems like such a foreign concept, right? The idea of,
right.
although to be fair, I'm sure it happens still to this day, right? There's still maybe not as pronounced and maybe not as exposed out there into the light, but human trafficking, slavery, there are still things that are very much real, not to
Right.
the extent.
Just not in broad daylight
Correct.
like it was
Not like in the
in
manner that it was
those
back
days. Yeah.
then, but
Yeah.
it's definitely. So I don't know. Is he a bad dude? I, like, not knowing, I guess that's part of why I would say the context is so important, right?
Yeah.
I really don't know much about George Washington beyond what I learned in school, right? I've never I've never done like a book report or watched the George Washington story or something
That'll
like
be
that.
next week, folks. We're doing book reports and we're monitoring the plant's
Right,
growth
exactly.
activity.
So there's nothing there that I can hang my hat on of like, no, this was a fantastic dude. Now, the one question that you did bring up, which I find really interesting, is that this country has this weird reverence to essentially an enemy combatant within its own populace that lost the war. And
Well,
you know
I
what I
will
mean?
say a part of this country does,
Part,
because
okay, no, exactly. No, there's a
so
part of
I'm
the
born and
country
raised in
that,
California, and I've
yeah,
never seen a Confederate flag that had any sort of that made me feel at home. It's not
right.
like I was like, oh hell yeah, like that was part of our. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a part of my history. Like
Hmm.
it's in my mind. But yeah, like you said, like you started. Well, you didn't start. It was a thing, and you fought for that thing, and you lost that thing, and it has gotten progressively, further from our normal behavior. So why are you still? What does the
Yeah,
flag mean anymore? Like
correct. And
it's
does that
it's
and whatever and everything that's tied to that flag and why they fought that war, right? There was a lot of underlying things, but slavery was more or less at the forefront of it. So
mhm.
is the idea that you're promoting this flag also that you're in line with that type of thinking? That's
It's
always
like the
kind of,
colonial
that's
flag,
kind of
right?
like,
Like, okay, so you know
I
the
don't know.
flag with like the 13 stars, like
Right,
the
right, right.
original 13
Yeah.
colonies. Like you see the colonial flag in colonial states, the original 13 colonies, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. Like you're touting the fact that you're an original 13, United States country. And but there's no stigma with that. You weren't wrong in doing that. I mean, you were, if anything, you were a revolutionary in doing that. But the Confederate flag is different. That
Yeah.
represents something that we have
Totally different.
moved on
Totally
from.
different. Right.
This is a terrible idea, and nationally we recognize it as a terrible idea. And I just think that, sadly, I feel like we're going to probably go way political here, But I feel like our current president kind of brings that out in people. Like I think that was hiding. Um, it wasn't such a in plain sight thing, but now it's like I feel empowered to bust out my Confederate flag and throw it on my truck and drive down the street. And so I hope that this is an eye-opening experience that gets people to think like, can we just get over this stupid flag and move on? Like it's not the statues. You could argue are a little bit more
I think it's more
historical
deep
because it's
rooted than
more
it, man.
nuanced.
I think it's,
But the
yeah.
flag is a throwaway. Like, get rid of it. It's, to me, it's not American history that we wanna revere.
I'm with you. I just think it's such a deep rooted part of certain parts of this country. Like it's
Yeah,
one of
and I
those
guess
things
maybe
where,
we don't understand that,
and being on the
maybe we
West
never
Coast, I
will.
think being on the West Coast, it is something that's a little more difficult for us to
Maybe we should
understand.
just shut up and stick to the left coast and
No, but I mean,
not try to
it is,
understand these
but
people.
no, but it is I think trying to gain an understanding is powerful in the sense of, you try to put yourself in the other people's shoes and see where they're coming from.
Yeah.
At the same time, doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it. But like I said, I find it weird because at the end of the day, they lost the war. It'd be like, for example, if this country was still under the control of the English, right, of Britain,
Yeah.
but yet they allowed the American flag to be flown everywhere. Even though they lost the war, let's just say the United States never wins the Revolutionary War. It's
Right.
still occupied by the British, so it's still
Right.
a British colony. But yet, do you think that the Brits would allow you to just freely fly that flag? The answer probably is no. Like they'd want to eradicate that and get rid of it.
Yeah,
It's interesting
good
how
point.
this country allowed that to just kind of be there and
Yeah.
allowed it to just continue
Or
to.
maybe it's just because they never took it down. Like year over year, they just never. They're like, hey,
they just left it
we're
up.
proud of the fact that we lost, and we're gonna fly this flag proudly. And then we're like 200, some years later, going,
yeah. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So-
I think it's an interesting time though, because I think the fact that these conversations are being had is the progress, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have these conversations before. They were just there. The flag is there. The statues are there.
Yeah,
the monuments are there.
If you
But
don't
now
like
that-
it, avert your eyes. The flag
Correct.
stays.
But now the fact that we're having these conversations, I think that is part of the progress. The fact that we're challenging ourselves and being like, well, wait a second, why are these things here? And
Right.
do we agree with them being
It's
here?
a good
do we
challenge.
want them here?
We should think
Right.
about this.
Exactly. This is something that, I think for all of us, it's a good thought experiment, and it allows you to explore. Like I said, to be honest, I never really thought about the flag too much. The Confederate flag, as a matter of fact, when I think of the Confederate flag, I think of Dukes of Hazzard. To be honest, that's my seriously, because that's my exposure to it, right? Like I grew up as a kid watching the show, and that's where I saw the Stars and Bars. That's really, I've never lived in the South. I've never hung out there. I've never had like life experience there, so I'm not familiar with that and all of that brings, right? Like some other folks. So I think that's where those deep rooted sentiments come from. So. Just a thought, but let me ask you this: as far as we see everything changing, and this kind of directly ties into the flag. What did you think about NASCAR finally taking a stand and being like, no more flags at our events, no more being associated with this particular symbol?
So I grew up watching NASCAR. It was one of my two sports that I grew up watching.
Yeah.
NASCAR is one of those sports where you either grew up watching it or you don't like it, because if you don't understand the nuances of what's going on the racetrack, and more importantly, the storylines around the characters, there's 43 guys on the racetrack, or, could be women on the racetrack at any given point. Shout out to Danica Patrick. And they're just going around in circles. They're making four left turns 400 times. Left. How is that interesting to anybody who doesn't understand the nuances of the sport?
Right.
The what goes on in the pits, what strategy is around fueling. So, but when you grow up on it and you watch, 30 some races a year, then all of a sudden you're kind of ingrained in the culture. So I grew up watching NASCAR. Love NASCAR I think I told you this before. When I was in college, I used to record every race, and I used to watch every single race.
You're the only dude that
every
I know.
single minute of every single race.
Of.
And by the way, this is the only sport when I was in college that you can record and watch the result 4 days later and nobody would spoil it for you. Like, you couldn't do that with any other sport, because no one gave a shit about
nobody
NASCAR.
Was watching that, bro.
And you wouldn't even see maybe every once in a while you'd see the ticker on ESPN.
Right, exactly, on Sports Center.
Maybe, but for the most part, I could. There was no spoilers for 4 days of NASCAR. So to see how NASCAR has everything else is progressing, and NASCAR is kind of like the old times. Like it kind of got left in the dust.
Yeah.
And they've tried a couple reboots on the scoring and what happens to
Well,
the
didn't they
points,
introduce
and
like the
there's a
chase, all of
playoff.
that, all of
There's a chase. There's a playoff
yeah.
system. There's an even more complicated playoff system now. I stopped watching. I lost interest. I just couldn't keep with all the rule changes. For me, I was like more of a purist that was totally cool with the, you know, the 26 race kind of pre-qualifier and the 10 race finals, if you will.
Mhm.
And they just made it too messy for me. So I eventually lost interest. But to answer your question, I was super bummed when, well, I was super happy to see that NASCAR finally was moving on from this Confederate flag, because like this, if anybody would have a tough time with this, it'd be NASCAR, just
Yeah.
because their whole sport is based in Charlotte, and it's a very southern sport in general. The biggest crowds show up in southern towns to watch, you know, any stock car race, not just NASCAR. So there's more of a culture there than, let's say, here, or in a northern Pacific Northwest state, for instance. Um, so they make this big push. They ban the Confederate flag. One of the leaders of banning the Confederate flag is Bubba Wallace, who's he's an African American driver.
I think he's the only one, right? Only
He's
African
the
American.
only
He's the
current
only
African
current
American
African American
driver.
driver. Yeah.
There's been African American, pro kind of NASCAR drivers in the past, but Bubba is the only present one. And then immediately, how does NASCAR, idiot respond, was by putting a noose in his garage, which obviously made the press on Sunday, when they were supposed to race. But then I was pleasantly surprised. By the way, I'm glad we didn't shoot the show
Yeah,
on
no,
Sunday,
totally different story, right? Yeah,
because
storyline.
now the story is, so here's everything that happened from the noose incident. Makes me very happy with how the sport did it. And I think my biggest takeaway from this story is hardly anybody knew about the noose. Like, one NASCAR official and one of Bubba's team officials found the noose, gave it to a NASCAR official. Literally 2 people in America knew about the noose.
Mm-hmm.
And so the NASCAR official that was privy to the story obviously went to his boss and said, "Hey, this happened. Like, it's right on the doorstep of us trying to eradicate the Confederate flag.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with this?" So all the brass of NASCAR got in a room, and they said, "What do you want to do with this? Do we want to?" They actually brought it up. They said, "Do we want to kill the story and make it go away, and maybe no one ever finds out about this, and it's not a black eye in our sport? Or do we want to take this thing head on and basically do the right thing," in my opinion, and say, "This happened. It's another bad incident, but we're going to respond we're going to do a full investigation. We'll find the culprit. There's only so many people that could go in this garage right now because of COVID and because of all these other things. So it's not a needle in the haystack like it would have been last year, let's say." And they do the right thing, and they publicize the story on their own account, meaning this wasn't leaked by anybody else in the press.
They came out on their own, and
they wore it. They came out. There was a huge showing of support for Bubba. Richard Petty, who's 82 years old, flies in for the race yesterday. To basically, he tweeted that, "I'm flying in, even though I'm old and like we talked about before, he's a COVID demographic, right?
He's COVID's demo.
He's
right?
supposed to be at home, but he flew in because he wanted to hug his driver, and I thought that was a great message. There was a great showing of solidarity. They pushed Bubba's car down pit road, and he was so celebrated the whole day. There was Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the stands and after the race in Talladega.
Mm-hmm.
He had a good run. He could have won the race, but he ran out of fuel, which is one of those, like, why did you run out of fuel? Like, as a non-NASCAR fan, you're like, how the hell do you run out of fuel? Your only job is
more fuel in the car. It's very simple.
The only job is to keep your tank full. They run out. Like, I don't even run out of fuel, and I'm not a race car driver. But what he said after the race, like, everything that's happened since the news is perfect for the sport. Viewership was up yesterday. Black viewership was up yesterday. Now, will they stay? Probably not. I mean, this is kind of going to be a flash in the pan for the sport. Eventually, they're going to tune in next week and be like, "Oh, look, they're turning left 1,600 times." Like, it's the same thing that we saw last week, right? Yeah, I think Bubba will get more fans, which is great for him. Right. But I'm excited to see everything that happened after Sunday. I think NASCAR and their new regime, by the way, there was an old guard of NASCAR that kind of walked away / they parted ways from a couple years back, and the new leadership is much like the NBA leadership with Silver, where it's like everything, in everyone's opinion, in the court of public opinion, everything that Adam Silver does for the NBA is like spot on. Like, the dude hasn't missed since Donald Sterling was an idiot and ended up with the team being taken away from him. So,
did you hear the news today, though, that the noose was not necessarily put there, and that, like, there was this thing, I don't know if you maybe saw it because it just came out right before we we started recording. The
No, I didn't
FBI
know.
says the noose in Bubba Wallace's garage was a misunderstanding over a door pull rope that had been there since October 2009, and no crime was committed. So I guess this
Well, if that's
was,
really true, then even better,
yeah, exactly.
because they own the story that they didn't even know what the outcome was. And if that's really the case, then there's not some racist idiot running around and backstage at a NASCAR race. Then that makes me even happier. I hope they didn't do all this for publicity, but if they did, like, that's a pretty elaborate
I think it's kind
story.
of, I think it's kind of to your point. I think they owned it, and then having done a full investigation, because this is the FBI's findings, right? This is what the FBI reported.
Because
They said
everyone
there's,
trusts the
yeah,
FBI.
well, another story for
It
another
works
day.
so well in other
They
outlets.
said that they found evidence that Wallace was not a victim of hate crime and no charges would be filed. So essentially, it seems like it was just a door pull that
So there is no
came off.
guilty party here,
No,
and
no,
it
no. It
wasn't
looks
an
like it looks
intentional
like this was
incident.
something that was there going back
Breaking
to
news, people.
October
The
of
plant has grown
2019.
during our show, and the noose was unintentional.
Was, yeah, the news was there for a while, so it wasn't necessarily like a deliberate or a predetermined attack or message being sent. It was more like this was there. It broke off. They kind of put it to the side, and then it was found. That's kind of the gist that I'm getting. And this is just news, like I said, that came out maybe about like 6:30, 7 o'clock. So right before we started shooting.
Thanks for the update.
So, yeah. So no, but I mean, I think it's awesome. Your point being that this wasn't something that NASCAR shied away from, especially how it could be contextualized as, oh, we take this hardline stance on the flag, and then 2 days later or 3 days later or whatever the time frame is, all of a sudden our one African American driver finds a noose in his garage. Like, oh my God, what is happening,
and
right?
Bubba was a huge part of the
Proponent.
stance on the
Yeah.
Confederate flag. So they, regardless of the outcome of this investigation, made a great decision to just own it and just say, like, we're going to support this guy. We're all going to support this guy. So that was a really good outcome. So speaking of sports that I grew up watching, the two sports that I grew up watching are now destitute, and that is NASCAR and baseball.
Yeah.
So breaking news today was baseball finally came up with the players and the owners and the Players Association finally came up with a way to make a season happen. Baseball was in the driver's seat, in my opinion, as soon as everything shut down. Because of the pandemic,
right?
It was clear to me that baseball had a real chance to make a resurgence, because baseball has not fallen off a cliff in recent years, but there's been a steady decline in baseball viewership.
Absolutely.
The only real money in the sport are the TV deals. Certain teams like the Dodgers are very well supported. They have a lot of fans go to their games. I think Dodger Stadium is the most Instagrammed location in the world, I want to say.
Wow.
It's very, or high on the list anyway. Most check-ins or most posts or whatever. So certain teams are doing very well, but for the most part, baseball has slipped and lost traction to other sports, NBA, NFL, even soccer, both internationally and domestically.
Domestic, right?
So did you watch Long Gone Summer? Because that dropped, I think, last weekend, which kind of brought me back to I don't want to even say the heyday of baseball.
The glory years of baseball.
Yeah, I was a baseball fan like during the strike years, when it was absolutely like a bunch of jabronis out there trying to play catch on a field, and I still was watching it for whatever reason. But so what did you think of Long Gone Summer? Because you're not really a baseball guy. You're by no means a baseball purist,
well,
right?
What's funny is that I was, to your point, and I had the similar type of epiphany down the line where, number one, it was so long, right? Although I've taken a different stance on the baseball season that we can explore at a later time. But back.
Oh, by the way, 60 games this year. If we can do this in 60 games, then what the hell are we doing it for 160 games?
Because that money. That's
that
what
TV money, baby.
That's what that ad revenue. But no. So I was so geeked when I found out that there was this show on ESPN that only played baseball highlights. I think it was called Baseball Tonight back in the day. Exactly. When I remember being like, I think it was 8, 9 years old, and I'm like, there's a show that only shows you baseball highlights. This is amazing. You get to watch all the games and da-da-da-da. So I was deep into the baseball cards, like into the collecting and all that. And then 94 hit. And when 94 hit, I pulled the cord and I was like, I'm out. Like,
You
this is
stuck
it.
with it. You were one of those people that
Dude,
like you just
no,
never went
it
back.
was so, yeah, I never really did, because
How
it was one of
dare
those
you
things.
strike?
Well, because it kind of hit during my formative years, right? As I was starting to diversify my sports content, if you will, to your point.
Okay,
And
fair.
it's at this point where baseball is kind of out of the picture, and all of a sudden you have NBA, Michael Jordan is out, but there's the rest of the league that's kind of going through. And then at this
You
point,
didn't want to watch the jabronis,
no, I did not want to watch the jabronis.
people's
And I was like,
dads
yeah.
on the field.
Hey Phil, you're up. Go. You're
Get
next
in
up
there,
to bat.
Bob.
Yeah, and not just that, the NFL, right? And this is during the Cowboys heyday of like 92, 93, 94, 94. They're in the championship game. They don't make it to Super Bowl. 95, they win again. So at this point, football is gaining traction on my radar. You know what I mean? You got
Yeah,
Brett
that's
Favre, you
fair.
got Barry Sanders, you got Steve
Yeah,
Young, you got Aikman and the triplet. You
Emmett.
got
Yeah,
the whole thing. Yeah,
Irvin,
exactly. Irvin.
Dion.
So so all of a sudden my attention starts to go elsewhere.
Yep.
And where I was once that little kid that loved baseball tonight, eventually it kind of waned. And so it was interesting reliving the 98 season, because I remember that in real time. That was right before I got to college. And I do remember it being a very huge deal, to the point where kind of the nation as a whole was entranced by this thing. And it's so
Mhm.
interesting because it really hasn't happened since then, where you have two guys conceivably going after the record at the same time, and kind of sort of battling. I hit a home run, you hit a home run, you hit two.
Yeah, all the way to
I go
the
back and
end. I
three,
mean,
and
three
all
guys
the way.
before
Yeah,
the All-Star break, and
yeah.
then it really boiled down to two. So what was like your big, okay, so as you're watching Long Gone Summer,
Mhm.
what did you not remember that it brought back to life for you?
Well, okay, right off jump, and actually one of our Twitter followers brought this up. I was having a little discussion with one of them.
Uh-huh.
The fact that Griffey was in the mix for a little
Yeah.
bit, totally forgot that Ken Griff Jr. was actually
And he had been doing it for
for a
years, right?
while,
Like
right?
he
Exactly.
was
I think
the
he was the
guy.
guy that everybody expected to get it. If
Yeah.
somebody was going to get it, they kind of expected
Well,
him.
the
So
overall record, everyone thought Griffey Jr. was gonna, the kid was gonna get the overall home run,
yeah,
the Hank Aaron record. Yeah.
right. So there was that. I forgot about the third player, kind of the third amigo in that kind of dropped off, but that was very much there for a good chunk of that. And then number two, I just forgot how freaking huge Mark McGuire was. Like
Huge dude.
how just like, I think he's like what, 6'4", 6'5", something like that. He's
They
just
said when he was drafted, he was 6'5", like 230 or something like
yeah.
that.
That's as a pitcher, right? Because he was coming out as a pitcher or
Well, he was
something
a
like
pitcher
that.
at USC.
That's USC.
He wasn't drafted as a major leaguer, as a pitcher, because USC figured out like, oh, this guy can crush a baseball.
Yeah,
We should move him to first base so we can play him every day instead of every 4 days or however many,
yeah.
however often college pitchers pitch. But yeah, I mean, he was a huge dude. Team USA, like just a baller.
He was a
Like,
monster. Yeah, he was
yeah.
just like he was just and I had forgotten too that even his rookie year he crushed like what, 48, 49 bombs, something like that,
Yeah.
like
I think
right
he
off
set the rookie record.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right off jump. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the things that in rewatching it, revisiting it, that I was like, oh man, I had forgotten about Griff. And then just watching, well, it's also interesting too watching non-high def footage. Yeah. Watching the old baseball
They're
clips.
like, welcome back to the 1998. You're like, what the
What
how did people see back then? Oh my God.
So
Yeah.
yeah, those were the two
I
things
think we
that
had to
kinda,
imagine a lot of things. Like, it's like, well, we
you could,
really
because you
can't
couldn't actually
tell.
see it. You can't
Yeah, I
see
was
it.
like,
So
you can't argue balls and strikes from home because you really can't tell
because
if
you
it was
can't
a
tell
ball or a
which one.
strike.
Yeah. What about you? Was there something in particular that stuck out to you as far as kind of like as you were piecing it together?
Yeah, how obvious that these guys were juiced. Like these guys were hitting freaking bombs. Like, I mean, unbelievable distance on some of
Yeah.
these. Like Sammy Sosa was hitting every home run in the street.
Mhm.
Like, you know how hard it is to leave Wrigley on that side of the field to the
Yeah.
streets?
Do it regularly.
Yeah, like every single one. You see the fans at towards the end of the home run race, they're just standing in the street waiting for him to drop one on him, because that's every single time he pulls the ball, he's
Yeah.
hitting it in the streets. Mark McGuire was drawing a couple thousand people to batting practice every day, just because he would hit 500 footers in batting practice. Like the distance that these guys were putting on the ball was like so freaking obvious that there was now they had great swings, they had launch angle, they had all the things that people drive analytics at now to get.
Yeah.
They just, like Mark McGuire said it, he's like, my swing was naturally good at putting the ball in the air and getting it to fly over the fence, but
It's like, I was just a baller from jump. I mean, it is what it
so
is.
freaking obvious. I mean, the guy had Andro in his locker when the press was huddled around him. It was sitting. He wasn't even trying to hide it.
But
Like,
okay, so do you
I'm
remember
juicing.
that back then? Like, well, Andro wasn't though. Andro was one of those things like
You didn't feel a little bit. It was one
GNC
of those things like you didn't feel a little bit guilty about having Andro in your
So I
locker.
think there's a clear delineation between the not okay, and I'm totally speaking out of school here. I know none of this, right? So this is just me postulating. But
Yeah.
it seems to me there's a difference between like stuff you can get over the counter that might mimic or help with the building of muscle versus full on injecting yourself with steroids. Like kind of like Canseco. Canseco's book was like, I had this regimen, I saw these
Right.
people inject themselves.
Well, they were doing that
da.
too.
So, well, that's what I'm saying. So, but I'm saying that as just far as just seeing the Andro there, it
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily like a dead giveaway. And this was the beginning of like weightlifting and kind of the bodybuilding mentality spilling over into sports. So there was a lot kind of going on around there. And the contracts, right, dude? You hit 30 jacks, 40 jacks, 50 jacks. All of a sudden, you go from making 3, 4, 5 million to 10 million, 15 million a year. That's a huge incentive.
Well, another thing that stuck out to me is like now you see guys that hit jacks, but they only hit jacks. They're like two outcome hitters, meaning like
that
they're either
just
hitting a
swinging.
bomb or they're whiffing, right?
Yeah.
And you see these guys all the time. These guys were hitting for average too. Like McGuire was like a 300 hitter, right?
Yeah.
Sosa was the RBI champion and hitting at a high level.
Yeah.
They weren't just trying to swing for the fence.
Yeah.
Just when they connected, the ball was flying like 490 feet off their bat. So it was just, I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again, where these guys were just going blow for blow, hitting colossal jacks every single night. Like when Barry did it, he didn't have like another Barry, right? It was just like,
no, he was just
Barry
by
hit 73 in San Francisco, but and he was same thing, like he was dropping them deep into the bay every single time. It was like, how the hell is this guy hitting the ball this far, And Barry Bonds, by the way, not a huge dude by nature. He's no McGuire in, like when he was drafted, he didn't look like McGuire. He looked like an average, size dude that just
happens to be
massive.
6'5" and just huge.
No, I don't think Bonds is 6'5".
Oh, I'm sorry, Bond. Oh, okay,
yeah. No, Bonds is like
6
foot.
Yeah, 6 foot.
Yeah,
no,
I mean he was fat. He was like a speed guy when he was drafted. All of a sudden, he's just freaking jacked, hitting these massive home runs in the bay. And if you Google Barry Bonds today, he's like a tiny dude again. Like he just has a big head, but he's like a tiny dude. Like he rides his bike all day and he's tiny. Well, I actually saw him at an MC Hammer concert.
Did you? Was he?
And I was like, holy shit, that's like Barry Bonds, but smaller, way smaller.
Well, I got some numbers for you here, and it's funny because in the documentary, they mentioned like, oh, we'll never see anything like this again, right? And then 2 years later, Bonds crushes the record by 3.
Right.
So,
but he had the formula. He had the juicing formula.
I'm just saying, okay, so Ruth hits 60 in. He hits 59 in 1921. He hits 60 in 1927. Then Maris waits about 30 some odd years before he hits 61 in 1961, right?
Okay. By the way, Maris hitting 61 is far and away the most impressive thing ever, right? Now that we know what we know.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
you look at his build, like he looks like you talk about like the replacement players, right? In '94, that's what he looked like.
They all look like that.
They look like that. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
They didn't eat right. They didn't lift weights. They were just dudes, like. With really great hands and eyes.
But then, so those are the 3 numbers, right? 59, 60, 61, and that's Ruth, and Maris.
And then we get to
then we get a
30-year lag.
And then all of a sudden we get to 98, where Sammy hits 66 and McGuire hits 70. 99, where McGuire still crushes 65. I forgot about that. The next year he
low key hits 65.
Low key,
no one talked about it.
Still beats the record. And by the way, so did Sosa, because Sosa in 99 hit 63. So 65, 63 the following year, right?
A lot of bombs in 2 years.
Still a lot of bombs, right?
Almost 130 bombs.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden in 01, like to your point, Bonds comes in and cleans up at 73. So all of a sudden,
by the way, Bonds, when he did that, was like 37, 38 years old. Like it wasn't, it's like when Roger Clemens got good again, you're like, okay, like you can't get good again at 37 and like in any sport.
All you got to do is eat right, take your vitamins, make sure you eat plenty of protein, stretch,
and slam steroids.
That too. And so
and
you had this
growth hormone.
You had this weird like 4-year stretch where dudes are like crushing into the 60s.
Yeah,
and then
Brady Anderson, who was like a pedestrian player, hit like
50, I think.
50, and he had like 37 by the All-Star break. It was like he kind of fell off and hit 50. Like
But
he was
then,
on pace to hit like 90 or whatever it was.
and so Bonds hit 73 in '01, and then we don't get anybody close till
No.
2017, where Giancarlo hits 59.
That's
So
59 is a huge
59
number.
is still
I
a huge
mean,
number,
the
right?
fact that Giancarlo stayed healthy for a season is amazing to me, by the way. That guy's falls
Yeah,
apart every year.
but that just so
But
that
and by
like
the way, Giancarlo is a huge, like he's a huge human being.
yeah,
He's massive. Like he was drafted massive. He got
continues to be.
more massive. Like he's like if you told me he was juicing, then he would have to be juicing all the way back to like probably when he was born, because that's just a big man.
So it's just interesting that we had that like little like 3.5 4 year stint from like '97
Yeah.
to '01, where people are just like, ah, that hallowed 60 number is being reached.
Yep.
One, two, couple players, three players. So that was it. Kind of after watching the documentary, it kind of made me go into a deep dive of like, well, okay, I want to remember kind of what these guys were doing and what the numbers look like, and the numbers look like crazy, right? They totally stand out when you're looking at all the numbers. Because I mean,
Yeah.
when you look back, like '96, Andres Galarraga hits 47 in the National League.
Doesn't count.
'97, Larry
Colorado.
Walker hits 49, and
Doesn't
then
count.
so it goes
Colorado.
47, 49, and then all of a sudden, boom, 70, 65, 50, 73. It's just
So
like
up until that point, as a
it's crazy.
baseball fan and as a baseball purist, I looked at the batting title was like that was my favorite player. The guy who hit for the best average,
The
who
Silver
produced
Slugger, is that who it
who
is?
no, just like the guy who wins the batting title. So like
Okay,
if you go back and look at like the average of the guy, like when Tony Gwynn was in his prime, he was
right.
winning batting titles at 380, 370,
Mhm.
really high average. I mean, everyday player hitting 380, nobody does that anymore. Like
Right.
Mike Trout is like the best player in the world, and he's probably like a 320 hitter.
Hmm.
And that's okay. Like that's a great average. He also hits for power. He also steals bases. He's a 5-tool player. And he puts fans in the seats. But at the same time, like for me, the best player in baseball was the guy who gave his team the most opportunities to get on base, to get innings started, to especially in the National League, to produce small ball, to kind of produce runs. And then we go to these big home run races that we saw in '97, '98, and up until maybe the last 10 years, we haven't seen him anymore. But it changed the game in the sense that like you probably couldn't name the guy who won the batting title for the
No
last
idea.
10 years
Hmm.
because no one even talks about average anymore. Who
No.
cares about average? Produce runs, RBIs, kind of, home runs, obviously, that's what gets you paid. Bryce Harper's made a ton of money batting 270 for his whole career. Like him and Mike Trout came in the league at the same time. Mike Trout bats, 320 to 315. Bryce Harper, 260 to 275. Pretty much make the same
It
amount of
seems like
money.
they diverge, and like you're either hitting for average or hitting for power, but it's rare that you get the
Well, I
full
think the
package.
power stats on both of them are pretty similar. Just Bryce Harper swings and misses a lot, and Trout puts the ball in play. So he has the speed to run out ground balls and get on base. So
Hmm.
he's just a better player in almost every way. But you just don't see people hit for average anymore. It's not a sexy thing for teams to go grab a 330 hitter. Or like D Gordon was you don't even
I don't
a
even
lot
know
of
what you're
people
talking
don't even
about.
know who
Yeah.
D Gordon is, but
No.
he was leading the league in average for a long time because he would hit like a nubber on the infield and run it out and get a single, and he'd bat almost 400, high 300s doing that. But he never got paid for that. I mean, he never got a big contract or anything.
Well, and
So
it's interesting too that in doing my deep dive, come to find out baseball and kind of bringing it back around, right? I think this would have been their opportunity to grab those eyeballs because since '94, since that strike, they really never recovered as far as attendance, eyeballs, all of that stuff. They
there's
kind
no
of
reason why we couldn't
yeah.
be playing baseball right now. I mean, baseball in the sense of the pandemic is the most socially distanced
Someone, yeah,
sport.
yeah,
I mean, if you can play the NBA in July, then you can play baseball in June, right? Like that. I mean, other than the locker room, like there's going to be some nuances around how players come and go.
yeah.
Like baseball is so much more possible than basketball or hockey or some of these other
A lot
sports.
less touching, right? Everybody's kind of in a
Yeah,
set
when you're
place, and yeah,
considering like other countries have started their baseball and soccer and so anyway, baseball could have filled that gap of like a team sport, a true team sport. I don't want to go down the road of NASCAR as a team sport, but baseball is that team sport that we could have had, and the fact that they screwed this up and they're going to be one of the latest things to the party is just a nightmare for them because they could have capitalized on this and they didn't. It's a bummer.
totally is. I agree, 100%. They could have been the first one there and kind of captivated the whole United States, right? They would have been the only show in town. So
Yeah,
getting all
it
those
could
eyeballs.
have had a resurgence, a 98-esque resurgence, especially if there was some good stories coming out of this year. Now they're talking about, is there even going to be any credibility around a World Series win? If so, whoever wins the World Series in 2020, which is going to happen like clear in November, by the way. Another developing story is like, okay, let's look at the 4 best ranked teams in baseball, right? It's like Minnesota, New York, all these cold weather cities, and it's like, how are the playoffs going to work in a cold weather
When you're
city in November,
when it's actually in the cold.
especially if there's a
Mhm.
pandemic still around? Like, can
Right.
you imagine huddling into Yankee Stadium in November with however many people are allowed there to
Yeah.
go,
I don't
and you
know.
got to wear a mask and you got to do all these things? So that's another difficult
Logistical,
situation.
right.
I did want to ask you this question about, so you've been in kind of a couple different business ventures. You're currently in a couple of different business ventures. And I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's really kind of early on in my entrepreneurial journey, what have you learned from these experiences? What is your roadmap for kind of sensing if there's a good opportunity around a deal, or if maybe it's something that you need to enter with caution or maybe back out of? Like, walk me through some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of your experience in business.
So interesting question, right? I was actually having a discussion with another individual about this, in that, so for example, this year, I actually had a consulting company that I was working with that ultimately ended up, we had to put it down. We had to unwind the whole thing. It just didn't work out. I've been
Sound like
involved.
a dog there.
Yeah, I didn't want to go down that route. Yeah,
Unfortunately,
it
we had
did
to
kind of
put it
sound like
down.
that. Yeah, we had to kind of, unfortunately. It's a business, people. It's a business. It
Way
goes
to
away.
euthanize it.
But yeah, essentially, my business partner and I knew that the business was going to be a challenge from the beginning. So to be fair to him, I kind of knew all of this going in. It wasn't necessarily a surprise or anything like that, but it was definitely a challenge in trying to get the business going to the level where we needed it to, for it to actually continue and make money. And
Mm,
so, part of the, so I started my legal practice, kind of unwound that, moved into full-time real estate, still doing that. I have another business venture right now that I'm actively participating in growing. I had the consulting as well. I have the podcast. So my hands are kind of in a lot of different pots.
mhm.
And the thing that I've realized, in not just working myself, but in watching others work, is that whenever it's a collaboration on your own, it's a double-edged sword, in that you can execute much easier because you're the only one that's responsible, right? So for example, if this podcast was a one-man show, I set up the camera, I do the editing, I do the recording, I do the whole thing. I don't have to necessarily wait for anybody to
Mhm.
help me out, or to hold their end of the bargain. But when you team up with somebody, having an idea of the vision of where you guys want to go or what you're trying to accomplish is super important. You both, whether it's 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many people, because you're going to be dividing things up amongst the group initially to get the venture going. It's so important for everybody to be bought in, and for everybody to know where you're headed. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What's the vision behind the activity that you're doing?
So
Because
which
if
one's
you're not,
better? I mean, because if you're on your own and you have the bandwidth, you could really take care of business, right? You could really just seek and destroy tasks. So which one do you find is better, or is there a situation where one's better than the other?
I like working with people because there's a certain synergy. There's a certain
Mm,
energy that you can derive from working with somebody else. Plus, you
right.
get to bounce ideas off people. You get to make proposals of like, hey, like kind of like what we do, right? Hey, what do you think about this segment? Or what do you think about talking about this particular topic? Or how do you think we should set this up? The ability to kind of go back and forth with somebody, I find very valuable in a business setting. So I do appreciate the opportunities of working with other folks, especially if you're aligned as to what you're trying to do. the,
Sure.
the the challenge becomes when that situation changes. So for example, with my previous business partner, I knew going in it was going to be challenging, and as we got into it, it got even more challenging because all of a sudden, they're getting married, they're having kids. The focus completely changes, right? All of a sudden, it's not there's just not the bandwidth there to get everything done. The attention is
Right.
diverted, understandably so. And so ultimately, you have to make the call of like, you know what, this may not necessarily be the way that I wanted to go. Let's just cut our losses and take things in a different direction. It's just not.
So
It's
so
not
in that
working out.
case, like, the business was kind of dependent on both parties being locked in, and so you just kind of unwound it because there wasn't a way to like split it out and do your own thing.
Exactly. And by the
Yeah.
way, I've seen that example multiple times. There was another business that I was helping kind of develop as well. And those two business owners, they had a kind of a unique product that they wanted to bring to market. And they were working, creating I believe in narrative. I believe in selling through a story. So
Yep.
you create a story around your brand, your product, whatever it is, and that's essentially what introduces the community to that particular product, and hopefully they buy into that, right?
Hmm.
So storytelling to me is very powerful. The problem here was with this particular business that both owners couldn't be part of the story. So even though the concept is where these two owners that have put together this unique product and we're out selling it, because of the employment situation, one of them was full-time employed and their employer couldn't
Double
necessarily know.
dipper,
Yeah, well, their employer, kind of like you, right? You getting a job in the middle of the week.
huh? Hey, my
So
job, quote unquote, knows that I'm a consultant.
so but with her, they couldn't
Yeah.
know that this person was involved in a different venture. And so when it came to the marketing, the production, all of that stuff, it was left to just one individual.
Can't do that.
And
Yeah.
that became
There's no
very, yeah, well,
story. You lost your
exactly. It just
story. Yeah.
became very hard to manage. And so that business went under as well. So they basically, ended up unwinding it. So it just got me thinking that when you partner up with somebody, or when you have a collective that's working towards something, having everybody on the same page is very, very important. And to the point that with this other venture that I got involved with, that was my first question to the CEO. I was like, okay, what am I buying into? What exactly do you expect from me? And what are we doing here? Is this just a startup? Are we just going to try to build something to sell it? Or are we trying to name brand recognition, something that we want to create a legacy in and leave behind? What is our overall purpose? What is our goal? Where do we want to take this thing?
What's your ideal answer to that question, by the way? What were you looking for with that question? Or
Uh,
are you just looking for clarity?
I'm just looking for clarity, because either
Okay.
one I can buy into. If we're building something to sell, that's great. Let's pump it in. Let's get
Just want to
everything
know
going.
where I
Yeah,
stand.
that's
Yeah.
the reality, right? Like I want to know where it's kind of like with you when you sit down with your client and you're like, okay, what are you guys trying to achieve, right? Are we just in here to make a quick buck, or are we trying to build brand awareness and a long-standing company that's going to be around for years to come? Or are we
Yeah.
simply just trying to catch the attention of some investor who sees real potential here, make it nice and neat, package it up, and hand it off to them?
Sure.
So there's different ideas for what people want to do. There's some people that like startups. They just want to create something, build the shell, the foundation, and then hand it off to somebody else to grow. And then there's the folks who are like, no, this is like my baby. This
This
is
is my
my thing.
legacy. I
Right.
want this to be in my family for generations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have to know where you stand, or at least that's my thinking is, I have to have after seeing this happen with these other companies, I have to know where I stand,
Mm.
just so that I can have a clear idea of what's expected from me. So if we're just trying to do the startup, that's great. I'm going to work my butt off. I'm going to do, but I know there's an exit point. It might be 2 years, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but at some point there's an exit. Probably not 10 years with a startup. You probably want to get rid of it in 5, but there's a shelf life to what we're doing. There's
Right.
an end point. With the other side, it's like, well, we're going to ride this to see where we can take it. We're going
Sure.
to try to figure out,
It's ongoing. Yeah.
exactly,
It's building
exactly.
perpetually.
And that affects your mindset, right? Because if your
Right.
mindset is, I know that at some point I'm going to get rid of this, well, then I'm always looking for that next business venture, right?
Right.
Where can I, where do I see opportunity? Where can I plant my next flag? Whereas if you know that this is going in perpetuity, well, then there's no need to be looking, right? It's like you're married. Once you're
Right.
married, that your focus goes on making the marriage work, making it the best marriage can be, and trying to see that thing through. Same thing with the business venture. And so having that talk at the beginning is so crucial, because you don't want to be like me in the middle of this year figuring out our taxes, having to put money, and then at the end of the day you're taking nothing but losses. At the end of the day, it was 2 years, it was
Yeah.
several $1,000s, and a great learning experience. I learned a ton. I absolutely, so in that respect, it was an even trade. I paid money and I learned.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have much rather have learned and kept my money if I could help it. So
it's like gambling. Like you're okay with breaking even because like you had fun and whatever, but like it'd be nicer if you walked out with a couple $100, right?
Exactly, totally, exactly right. And that's the same thing here. So for anybody out there who's thinking about starting something or working on something, definitely look who you're aligning with and have that difficult conversation of, hey, what do we want to do with this? Where do we want to take it? Are we in this? Is it like, for example, what conversation that you and I have with this thing? We talked about, what do we want to do with it? And you brought it up earlier. If we get no views, if we get no clicks, that wasn't why we started this thing. So there's no reason to end it, because that's not what we're looking for if we don't get that, right? So
we were okay with that outcome. If we put up 6 of these and nobody ever clicked on it, we were okay with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we would create a narrative around our stories that we could then repurpose for our businesses, or we could repurpose it for any sort of medium that we wanted to. Like a lot of this is just capturing the way we think so that we can distill that into our story that we put out for our potential clients to understand us. So
Mhm.
we were definitely okay with that route, but I fought you pretty hard on the video and you won. So nice work.
But the bigger point being that we had that conversation, right? We at
Yeah,
the very beginning we were like, hey,
it was
what do you want to do
collaborative.
with this? What do I want to do with this? How is this going to work? Da, da, da,
Yeah.
da, da. It wasn't just like, oh, okay, let's do it, and then we get into it, and all of a sudden, episode 3, we're like, oh man, we have to actually do it now. Oh, well, I was thinking it was
Yeah.
going to fizzle out after episode 2, so I don't want to do
Yeah.
anything now.
And sometimes when you work in teams, some of the things happen organically. Like I kind of naturally gravitated towards the post-production stuff, and you kind of naturally gravitated towards like running the YouTube page and kind of doing a little bit more on the social media side. So that was good because like in any business, you want to specialize. You want to have players that are really good at what they're
Yeah.
doing what they're good at. And so, I think we're smart enough to know where our limitations are. And I'm totally cool with throwing my hands up and saying, I don't know the first thing about starting a YouTube channel. So if all things are the same, you're probably better off doing that than me. I would love to do the post-production. I can edit video. I can edit audio. I can find out what's relevant and what isn't, what people think are, is worth listening to and what isn't. But I think one of the things that I'm finding as a business on my own is when I go to, people always say like, well, how do you pitch your services? And I'm like, well, I don't pitch my services. I put myself in situations where I find somebody that needs something that I offer, and then I qualify the hell out of it. Like, I'm only willing to put a round peg in a round hole at this point. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to try to pitch or sell somebody on the fact that they need me when they don't. Or if it's a stretch for me, I'm not going to go reach for it and muddy up their business with my own learning curve, if you will. Like, I will muddy up my business with my own learning curve every day.
We're doing it
Because
right now. You're
yeah,
watching it in real time.
exactly. We're spending time on this as we muddy up our
Yeah,
own lives.
exactly. So
But I won't do that for a client. So I always tell people like, there's no, from here on out, if we end up doing business together, it's because I offer you something that you can't find anywhere else, or you can't find it as good as you have it with me. And I bring extreme value to the table so that whatever you're paying me is a fraction of what I can produce in value, in brand recognition, in sales, in profit, whatever. But what I'm noticing is that a lot of the clients that I have, some of the clients I have, and some of the clients that I talk to that kind of doesn't end up being a deal, is because my energy level as a consultant is so high that I need somebody that has at least 50% of that energy to kind of like get in a partnership with me. Like, I can't do business with somebody who's just flatline, tone deaf, doesn't get excited about their business, doesn't get excited about building whatever process that we're building. If you can't contribute some of that energy to the conversation, I just real early on, I figured this isn't a great fit. Like, you could probably find
well,
someone that's more robotic in their process, and maybe that will create better value for you than somebody like me, who's going to be a little bit more needy, but we're going to grow so much more if you're
right.
willing to go down that path with
Well,
me.
let me give you a perfect metaphor. It's like trying to pull a cart with 1 versus 2 horses. Like if you at the very beginning say, "Hey, we're going to pull this cart together, and this is where we want to go." It's much easier than having, because now you know where you're going and you know what your responsibilities are and what you have to do. It's a
Mhm.
lot more difficult when you have 1 horse over there, 1 horse over there, and they're pulling in different directions because there hasn't been any communication as to where we're even going,
Have you
right?
ever tried to lift something really heavy and the asshole that you're with doesn't want to count? So like, I'm Mr. Count. Like, I'll always be like,
One,
okay,
two,
on
three.
3, 1, 2, 3. It's very clear when we're gonna
Yeah,
lift. But sometimes you just get in one of those situations where you're lifting like a 120-pound object with somebody who's like, oh, I'm just gonna lift. And you're like, dude, that's exactly how we both break our backs. Like,
exactly.
all you have to do is be like, look me in the eye. 1, 2, everybody knows. On
Boom.
3, you
Exactly.
lift. Like, it's very simple. But I mean, that message is lost on some people, and I can't be ignorant to the fact that like, that's a bad relationship for me to be in from a business sense. Like, this client's not going to get the most out of me, and I'm not going to be able to create the maximum amount of value in the relationship. So maybe early on, it's one of those, like, I'm not necessarily desperate for work. Maybe there's a day where I'm like, I have to take this. Like, this is the only thing I have on the books for the whole month or the whole quarter. I got to take this agreement on, and I'm just not really feeling it. But right now, I've been blessed enough that I haven't had to take those on. But it's certainly something as a business owner that you grapple with. It's like, man, this really isn't the ideal deal for anybody, but we're going to try it. We're going to see how it works. But it seems like, you know, you've kind of taken some of those chances and you've learned from those mistakes, and you've kind of figured out when it's the right time for you to go, when is the right time for you to maybe, you know, it's a yellow light, we kind of got to pump the brakes, but we're still moving. And then when it's like hey, I'm hard out on this, like this, you know, for whatever reason, this just isn't for me.
So for example, like the legal practice, after 2 years, I was like, I'm not having fun doing this. Like, you know, the firms that wanted to hire me on wanted me to kick people out of their, you know, basically do evictions. It was 2011, 2012 during
Yeah,
the bottom
that's
end
not
of the
fun at
recession.
all.
No, it's not, right? I didn't go to law school and become an attorney to then kick people out of their house or offices, basically, because they
You're
wanted
like me. You'd
offices.
be a terrible security
So
guard. You'd
yeah,
be like,
exactly.
you're not really fucking up that bad. Like,
You can come in, it's okay.
yeah,
Like, no,
just
no, your job is
whatever.
to
Like,
keep people out. No, well,
right.
but
Yeah.
he looked like a cool guy. I wanted to
Don't
learn.
want, never hire me as a security guard,
So,
people, because I'm
so
terrible.
with that, it was real quick. Like after about 18 months, I'm like, I was doing contract negotiation. I was doing simple contract stuff, but even that wasn't really calling my attention. But with the real estate, it was like, oh, okay, so I get to do client development. I get to
Yeah.
develop a social platform. I get to be the IT guy because I have to do the networking and the website, things like that. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, there was a lot of things
So
there that
many
really kind of
outlets. Yeah.
correct. With the consulting, after a year of losses, I'm like, oh, I can't. I really, I really bet on myself, and unfortunately, that one didn't pan out. It was one of those things where I really thought that even if I was the one horse pulling the cart, I could kind of carry the load and get us to home plate. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. And it was one of those
Yeah.
things where I had learned previously, cut your losses quickly. There's no sense in, because we could have dragged it out for another year and see if we could get additional clients and try to grow. But it was one of those things where it was just the synergy wasn't there anymore. It's kind
Yeah.
of like once that is gone, there's no sense in trying to force it. Like the example that you gave of square hole, square peg, square hole.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect analogy. I don't want to try to ram this triangle into this square. It's just not going to work. Same thing here. It's like, why even, you know, it did cost money. You know, didn't make a profit. It is what it is. Cut it now.
It's
And
okay to fail as long as you fail fast. I heard
well,
that from
and
somebody one time, and I was like, that was really a staple thought that I have when I think, is this worth doing? Well, if I'm willing to admit that I failed at a relatively quick speed, then it is okay, because at the end of the day, there'll be a small investment of time and money, and you'll be like, okay, this wasn't it. Like, I failed. Let's move on to the next thing.
but immediately another opportunity came up. So
Yeah.
as I'm unwinding the consulting business, this thing pops up. So there's a
Yeah.
good chance if I keep trying to make the consulting thing work when it's not, I lose out on this.
Well,
I'm like, no,
business is
Joe.
like that though.
Yeah.
Like a
So it's
lot of
kind of like
times being in business leads you to
more
another
business.
piece of business, right? Like
Yeah.
it's weird how you just open your doors, like whether it's theoretical and you're a brick and mortar, or I mean, whether it's actual and you're a brick and mortar, whether it's theoretical and you're like, you know, a kind of remote type business. Being open for business and creating relationships will breed business. That's like, I mean, some people are better at it than others. Some people are
Right.
super good at marketing. Some people are super good at networking. Some people just have the thing that everybody wants. But if you're not open for business, you can't do it. Like it's not gonna, you're not gonna get that deal that just walks in or refers in, or you're not even gonna know what the market will bear until you actually go out and say, this is my business. Does anyone want to work with me? It's like, it's
Right.
that simple, you know?
Mhm.
Cool, man.
All right. Well, I think with that, that's a nice way to button it. You have to be in business to get yourself some business. I like that.
That's
I
right.
think we can end on that note. Guys, thank you so much for watching and going through this. Was it again, episode 3 is in the can. I'm
Let's do
super
it.
excited. For all those folks who have not yet subscribed, if you made it this long, highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to drop us a like or a dislike, whatever. It's up to you. You get to tell us how you felt about this whole thing. Hit the notification bell so that you're notified next time we drop a segment, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. And guys, thank you so much for taking this ride with us. We really do appreciate it. Joe, any parting thoughts?
Peace out, y'all. Stay gassed up.
All right, guys, the gas out is over. Bye-bye.